Good afternoon, Professor. Before starting our presentation, I would like to introduce my classmate, Daniela Sanchez and Marco Salazar. Before starting talking about linguicism, I would like to talk about the role of the course book and its impacts on ELT education. We know that the course book plays a central role in English teaching language, offering a coherent structure for the instruction of grammar, vocabulary, language skills, and classroom interaction. In addition to their educational purposes, these resources serve as cultural instruments embedding particular ideologies and perspectives. Often textbooks mirror and perpetuate dominant culture and linguistic norms, which can lead intentionally or not to the marginalization of non-dominant cultures, a phenomenon known as linguicism. According to Gray, 2012, a common critique of ELT textbooks is their tendency to reflect predominantly Western or Eurocentric viewpoints, frequently overlooking or oversimplifying the complexities and lived experiences of diverse global communities. Now, it is necessary to understand the word linguicism. How is the word linguicism defined? Linguicism is a term coined by Skatnab Kangas, and she described the linguicism as discrimination based on language. The term itself was introduced in the mid-1980s by her, and she defined it as ideologies and structure that legitimize, accomplish, and reproduce unequal division of power and resources between groups defined by language. The concept arose in parallel with other discrimination languages as racism, sexism, identifying discrimination based on language. Linguicism can relate to the language that a person speaks, how that person speaks this language, and the language they either do not use or they are not proficient in. Why we have chosen linguicism? Number 3, there are some implications for that. The first one impacts education equity. Linguicism can lead to unequal educational opportunities, for example, when certain language is prioritized over others. Another reason is affects identity and self-esteem, because language is deeply tied to identity. Therefore, if the students' languages are marginalized, their sense of self-worth and cultural identity can suffer, and reduces linguistic and cultural diversity due to linguicism prevent bilingualism or multilingualism by promoting only one superior language. There is something else related to the human linguistic rights, but it's going to be explained by Daniela.
Now I'm going to explain to you some important concepts related to linguicism. They are linguistic genocide and linguistic human rights. Linguicism undermines linguistic diversity and can lead to a more serious phenomenon, which is linguistic genocide. Kangas in 2001 defined the concept as prohibiting a group's language from being used in everyday conversations, in educational settings, or in printed materials and publications. She also stated that the only way to preserve a language is through its transmission from one generation to the next. However, when children enter a formal education system where they are not allowed to learn and use their native language, this language will be eventually lost. As a response to this kind of discrimination, linguistic rights were first included as an international human right in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Um, these linguistic human rights emerged to stop the marginalization faced by speakers of minority, indigenous, and non-dominant languages. The concept became prominent in the late 20th century, especially through the work of linguists like Thomas Kangas, who emphasized that language is a human right, not just a communication tool. Linguistic human rights are based on the idea that all individuals are and communities should have the right to learn and use their mother tongue, especially in education, maintain and transmit their language across generations, and access public services, legal support, and education in their language. International documents such as the Universal Declaration on Linguistic Rights from 1996 and frameworks from UNESCO and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People from 2007 support these principles. Well, the linguistic human rights have some benefits and also and challenges regarding their implementation. Regarding the benefits, they protect cultural identity. Language is tied to traditions, worldviews, and identity. Linguistic human rights help preserve endangered cultures. They also promote social justice. They give voice to marginalized groups and challenge linguistic hierarchies. They support educational success. Children learn better when taught in their first language, especially in early education, and they encourage multilingualism. Linguistic human rights promote language diversity and peaceful coexistence among different linguistic groups. Regarding the challenges, practical difficulties, it can be hard to implement multilingual education policies in countries with many languages. There is also some political resistance. Some governments resist granting full rights to minority languages, fearing national division. There are some resource limitations. Creating materials, training teachers, and funding programs in multiple languages is costly. And finally, there are some global language pressures. English and other dominant languages are often linked to economic opportunity, leading some communities to abandon their native languages voluntarily. Finally, I will explain the connection between multilingualism versus linguicism. Multilingualism plays a vital role in resisting linguicism. Promoting multilingualism values all languages equally and challenges the idea that only dominant languages, such as English, deserve institutional or societal support. In contrast, linguicism often marginalizes minority, indigenous, and non-standard language speakers, reinforcing social inequality and limiting access to education, justice, and employment. Encouraging multilingual practices in school, media, and public policy fosters inclusion, preserves the linguistic diversity, and empower language speakers to participate fully in society. As Skubner Kangas 2000 argues, multilingual education supports linguistic human rights, allowing individuals to learn and use their mother tongue while gaining access to additional languages rather than being forced to abandon their linguistic identity. Thus, multilingualism is not only a pedagogical asset, but also a powerful tool for social justice, helping to dismantle the hierarchies and prejudices created by linguicism. Now, Marcos is going to talk about some studies and findings related to linguicism.
Looking for evidence of linguicism, we have come up with the following question. In what ways does linguicism affect education globally? Linguicism has a significant impact on the education system around the world. it is often seen in policies and practices that prioritize dominant languages while overlooking or undermining minorities and indigenous languages. One clear example is when schools teach only the dominant language and provide no support for students' native languages. This creates barriers for students who do not speak the dominant language, particularly in immersion learning environments. So this student may take between 6 to 8 years to reach the language level needed to fully participate in classroom learning, which put them at disadvantage. Analyzing the findings, we have found the case of the United States, the Philippines, and Guam. Additionally, the monopoly of the dominant language in classroom can lead to subtractive learning, where students are expected to forget or unlearn their own languages to assimilate into the mainstream system, as would happen with the Philippines in the Guam Island due to the American policies by which English was introduced as a means of instruction, making the country dependent on a borrowed language covering a whole system of life and its consciousness. Then, still dependent and seen as the language of success, almost eradicating local languages. This assimilationist approach stands in contrast to integrationist, both philosophies that promote additive multilingualism and recognize the value of multiple language competences. Moreover, linguicism affects equitable access to education. When essential learning materials like textbook, qualified teachers, and curriculum content are only available in the dominant language, students from minority language background are at disadvantage. The systemic inequalities often reinforce negative stereotypes about non-dominant languages and cultures, leading to stigmatization and alienation of their speakers. Unfortunately, as a result, students from marginalized communities may experience lower academic success and higher dropout rates. In second term, we have found the case of British Empire and the Commonwealth of Nations. For instance, we can find this case of the English language expansion due to geopolitics through colonialism. As Philipson mentions, in the 20th century, as one of the established by the British Empire in Asian and African countries that then became part of its Commonwealth of Nations, creating deep bonds of submission, including the preparation of personnel to settle the language provided by the former colonial office. An example of this is India, as Jean Grant points out, where there are more than 122 languages, 26 of which are used for instruction officially, being English the language to learn mandatorily in schools, and is seen as the power language for the economy. Closer to us, we have the case of Spanish, Portuguese, and other languages. Reviewing findings regarding the Latin American context, it is also possible to realize how original languages have undergone and displaced from their territories by languages such as Spanish or Portuguese, due to the Eurocentric view that has prevailed during the conquest and colonization of the peoples. Now, Claudia is going to conclude.
Okay, after we have said about linguicism, we can conclude that working on linguicism can also introduce new aspects to the struggle against other forms of discrimination. Nowadays, the current focus is on promoting a more multilingual society. Somehow, the current books call for a more inclusive approach to human rights that recognize and protects linguistic diversity, as a fundamental aspect of cultural identity and human dignity. Work on linguicism can also introduce new aspects to struggle against other forms of discrimination. I hope that our presentation has been clear, and thank you for your attention, Professor.